I front-load the impossible. The engines hummed like a sleeping machine. The radar sweep slid its soft green arc. The deck watch smoked and spat and kept an eye on the horizon. Nothing else failed. Nothing else lost time, except every compartment clock on the ship, the brass faces in the wardroom, the cheap gym clock in the mess, the polished clock over the engineering hatch, all stopped at 0209 and did not move again for exactly 9 minutes. 9 minutes with no second hand. That is where the ship's life paused and where ours began to fray. You learn a ship's rhythm the way a surgeon learns a heartbeat. There is the bridge cadence, helm calls, course corrections, the tidy cadence of two-man watches. There is the engineering cadence, valves tick, pumps whisper, the board hums a constant useful monotone. Time on a warship is not private, it is a distributed fact. Watches are synchronized. The whole boat moves on a consensus clock. The bridge, the radio, the galley, and the engine room all line their small faces to the same pulse. Most ships have a master clock system. Call it what you will, a master chronometer, a timing pulse, a central console that sends a beat down wiring looms to slave clocks. It keeps everyone telling the same story. On older boats, those slave clocks run off synchronous motors tied to the ship's electrical frequency. On newer ones, you get GPS-synced pulses. Either way, when 900 men are supposed to eat at 0600, they eat at the same second because someone somewhere has insisted on a single time. My job was not timekeeping. I was petty officer in charge of a small patrol crew, a diesel-electric coastal patrol cutter of modest size. We were part of a rotation, short legs, close to shore, more watch-standing than battle. The boat's name matters only to paperwork. On the deck and in the racks, we called her by her hull number because names get sentimental. We had been at sea for 4 days, the usual slow grind of navigation fixes, sonar sweeps, and the kind of boredom that smells like engine oil. There was no reason to suspect anything unusual about the night. The weather was a flat-handed gray. We were steaming at a patrol speed, not high, not slow enough to spare us boredom. At 0200, the bridge set a standard course and handed the watch to the junior officer. Standard protocols: check the log, verify the master clock, note any contact, and keep the bridge-to-engine telegraph line clean. We filed checks at quarters. Everything behaved. A normal night looks like a normal night until a single anomaly explains the rest. When a clock stops on a ship, you do what procedure teaches you. You note it. You report it. You do not panic. Clocks fail. Motors seize. Sometimes moisture kills a contact, or a rodent nibbles an insulation jacket. Sometimes a fuse blows. Sometimes a careless engineer opens the wrong panel. We have redundancy. We have spare clocks lashed in boxes. We have a petty officer who can open the master clock cabinet and tell you whether it was a tripped breaker or a mechanical seize. We are mechanicians, and we are conservative by temperament. So when the chief on the mid-watch came down to the wardroom and said, "All the clocks stopped," we nodded. He was the sort of man whose face is made out of ledger lines, quiet, precise, slow to worry. He tapped his wrist and said 0209. He went on to the next job, expecting it to be a technical matter. Small men in uniform make small announcements. Small announcements sometimes create the largest ripples. We opened panels. We traced wires. The master clock in the radio room, an inconspicuous brass disc bolted on a square of aged plywood, showed no obvious fault. The power feed to the clock bus registered normal voltage. Our GPS feed showed continuous lock. The navigational computer echoed UTC steadily. Pumps rotated. The diesel ticks were clean in the engine room. Nothing else conspired to explain how the ship's synchronized faces could all stop and then start exactly 9 minutes later. A clock is more than a tool. On a ship, it is a contract.
When an alarm sounds at 04, you are at your station because the face above the hatch said to be. When the second hand ticks past 30, you know the engineer is doing his rounds. Time organizes muscle memory. If you remove that contract for 9 minutes, people do things that make no sense afterward. Petty Officer Larkin, a small, fast-talking man who was our helm watch for the night, later told me he'd been walking the deck under the night sky and had stared at his wristwatch at 0209. He said he had the oddest urge to check the binnacles. He checked a compass that had been adjusted that afternoon. Its reading had shifted inward by 2 degrees. Larkin told us, still looking for a diagnosis. I went to the helm, glanced at the compass, and then I swore the stern light was painted on the sky. He sounded foolish saying it. Another man, the cook, blamed the clocks for something smaller and more personal. His coffee had boiled dry while he remembered stirring it, and when he opened the galley, the pot was cold and the kettle full, as if someone had filled it but not taken a sip. He kept asking, where did the heat go? As if heat had been stolen by a polite thief. And then there was the radio tech, Corby, who told me quietly, the timestamp on the routine HF log jumps. The incoming message shows an internal mark, 020900, and then 021859. The audio between is flat, silence, then the carrier comes back. He had the prints to prove it, a radio teletype with a straight-line gap of exactly 9 minutes. Absence in a log is not an absence in the world. It is an absence in consensus.
We can call these things cognitive illusions. We can file them under fatigue. Men at sea do see things wrong. Hours blur, food tastes different, watchstanders nod off and salvage a dream into a memory. But memory is not the only evidence. The clock faces were dead. The master bus showed a clean beat. The radio recorded a gap. The bridge console showed the GPS track streaming in continuous points. The compass shifted a hair. Small physics were conspiring with small human fissures. That afternoon, after the clocks had resumed, we checked the engine room log. The man who stoked the diesel recorded an unexpected surge in oil pressure at 021214, then normalcy. The pump telemetry logged a short-lived pressure spike that corresponded to the 9-minute interval. Valve positions registered an unauthorized opening for 8 minutes and 57 seconds, and then a manual command restored them. There was work done below that no one in the log claimed. The ship's instruments remembered actions that no man signed. You do not immediately bring anomalies like this to the public. There are channels. You file technical occurrence reports. You mark the data. You run diagnostics. But the captain has other tools besides the form, his voice, the manner of his walk into the wardroom, the way he lays a report down and looks at the men across it as if sizing them. He called a closed meeting at 9 a.m. The senior watchstanders gathered in the small fluorescent wardroom that smells like paperwork and old coffee. The captain slid the master log across the table and said, with the calm exactness of a man offering a verdict more than advice, if a ship's clocks stop while you are on watch, you do not discuss what you saw during those minutes unless ordered to report it through the proper line. You sign nothing about what you think unless it is operationally relevant. You hand that information to me and me alone. It was not presented as secrecy for secrecy's sake. He framed it as an operational imperative. Rumors in small crews metastasize into bad decisions. If we spread suppositions, he said, we will lose the machine. Keep the machine. Report technical facts. Do not gossip. He used the words with the slow weight of someone who'd seen a rumor ruin a patrol. A captain's order is not simply command. It is a lid placed over a simmering claim. We obeyed, mostly. Obedience aboard a ship is a form of hygiene, but secrecy breeds a strange kind of pressure. You keep your mouth shut, and your head grows a small archive. You start to catalog what you saw in private and what you now present as cold, verifiable numbers. Meanwhile, the petty officer who had been assigned to run the master clock opened the cabinet in the radio room and found nothing obvious. The wiring was intact. The timing pulse generator read a clean output on the oscilloscope. The feed that distributed the pulse to slave clocks logged a flat line during the 9-minute window, as if the pulse had been arrested, but the pulse generator itself logged no interruption internally. It was as if the beat had been snatched out of the distribution bus, while the generator kept saying it was alive. Something ducked beneath the wiring and took a beat with it. We called in the tender support, a shore tech. A man from the yard with a pencil behind his ear poked at connectors and made the sort of noises men make when they do not yet know if they will be explaining a fault or witnessing something stranger. He traced the bus back and forth and then finally said, "If all the clocks stop simultaneously and the master shows a steady output, there are two plausible explanations: a distributed fault in the clock bus wiring or an induced electromagnetic event that only affected rotary synchronous motors and the clock drives." We had not experienced anything like an EMP in our area. There was no missile flight, the radio spectrum was clean, no military exercise was scheduled. Yet the technician could not claim a confident, mundane cause. He filed the technical memo, and then, with a glance that matched the captain's earlier look, added, "File it as an anomalous time loss pending analysis, and do not attach the raw tapes to any public release." The words felt like the seal over the lid. People adapted in small human ways. Some laughed at themselves. Some made cracks about supernatural clocks. Others pulled back and watched their hands, as if rehearsing a greeting with time. The most disconcerting changes were not dramatic. They were accents in behavior. Men who were steady grew brittle with small obsessions, checking locks, checking the mast, retelling the seconds like a litany. Larkin started carrying 2 watches, one on each wrist. He would check them at the same second and then stare at the difference. He found that after the interval, one watch, an old mechanical he'd seldom used, read its time exactly, while a cheap digital wrist timer advanced slightly ahead. He began to suspect his own coordination. Another man, Toma, the sonar watch, started to hum at the same tempo. Not a tune, just a metric beat he matched to his breathing. He would stand at the sonar console and count under his breath, 1, 2, 3, until someone told him to knock it off. He eventually admitted, in a voice like a man finding words for a bruise, "During the blacked minutes, I felt like I was somewhere else. I can't place where. But when the clock started again, my hands smelled of sea I had not touched." Time can leave residue on your hands. We had a near miss as the behavioral changes stacked against a mechanical oddity. On the 4th day, the helmsman, a man who had never missed a petty instruction, misread a helm call while we transited a busy shipping lane. He told the quartermaster to come left when the order was steady as she goes, which is a small error until you were in a corridor with a loaded trawler closing. We avoided collision because the officer of the watch used the engine to slow, and the radio operator took manual control. The incident was attributed to fatigue and debriefed. The record framed it as human error, but inside the wardroom, the chief said something simple, quiet, and true. We misplace more than minutes. We misplace context. That is the dangerous thing.
At 0317, on the 5th day, an amateur-looking thing became authoritative. The ship's bell, an old bronze hung at the break of the quarterdeck, rang out 3 times. There was no ceremony, no scheduled watch change. The bell clanged clear and bright, as if struck by a steady hammer, 3 times. The bridge telegraph did not command it. The bell rope was secured. Men on deck reported seeing nothing, yet the sound carried through the boat.
Men came on deck to see if we were underway or if something had fallen. The bell rang again, 5 times, like a hand counting out letters. The pattern was not random, it felt deliberate. The sea can count with a language you once learned and forgot. The audio and timestamps on the bridge recorder gave an impossible fact. The bell rung with timestamps that leapt across an auditorium of time. The bell's recorded strikes matched the 9-minute offset pattern we had been tracking. The bell had rung during the silent minutes on cameras that later, when we reviewed them, displayed the same blank in the footage. A shoreside analyst later told us in guarded language that the cameras had a buffer window. If something happened in the buffer and could not be reconciled with the incoming timestamp, the system wrote a placeholder and then resumed normal recording. In practice, it meant the cameras, like a liar with good intent, had decided not to show us the interval. We could patch the frames and watch ghostly, grainy smears, but no definitive sequence. The bell had rung. The bell had been recorded in a way that made sense only after you accepted that some ledger had been edited. The escalation came in small technical ways, and then in one human-sized step that we could not easily explain away. The night after the bell, the officer of the watch awoke to a sound, something scraping along the hull, a wet pulsed slide, like a hand moving along the outside skin. The watch sounded the general quarters because you do not ignore the hull. We lit the searchlights, we ran the sonar sweep, we swung the cameras, and we asked the tender to come alongside. The external hull contact showed nothing. No AIS blips, no naval traffic, just the ocean, a flat band of gray. Yet there were thrice-pulsed scratches in the paint near the waterline, as if something with a soft appendage had rubbed the hull gently for a measure. No sample, no drag, no residue, just paint scuffs. Then a man went missing. He was not a significant figure. He was a deckhand named Vasha, quiet, with hands that had been on ropes for years. He had been assigned to the bow watch and then later to the paint locker. At 0100, he had left a note pinned in his locker, a small fold with the words, "I'll be back," nothing more. At 0405, after the bell and after the hull sound and after the 9-minute pattern had embedded itself into our night habits, he did not appear at his station. We searched. We ran hull checks. We called his name through tannoys. We looked at the mast cameras. The cameras showed him walking forward at 0358. They showed his silhouette step out on deck. Then the buffer gap claimed him. At 0407, we found a wet boot print trailing from the deck into the sea at the bow, ending at the railing. The rail was dry. The print suggested the man had been standing on the sea for a moment, and then not. You look for a missing man in the places men have the habit of being. Sometimes habits are not where the world has placed them. We recovered nothing, no life ring, no glove, no scrap of torn fabric. The stern camera later recorded the bow camera knocking, as if the bow camera itself had recorded a single frame of a man leaning out and looking back. The evidence was a single low-resolution frame of a man at the rail at 035912. The man's face was indistinguishable, but his posture was peculiar. He seemed to be at ease, as if leaning to listen. There is a bureaucratic machinery that loves to finish stories. It writes clear sentences and puts stamps on them. We were given those sentences in spades. Personnel missing overboard during routine operations, read the first classified cable. No foul play suspected. No collision reported. The missing man was listed as lost at sea. There were condolences and more stamps. And then, for public record, a line that read, "No sign of anomalous activity. Probability of equipment malfunction high."
Under that envelope, something else occurred, which I only learned about because I signed a non-disclosure in a small, salt-stained office with a man who said he worked in logistics. He slid a smaller envelope across the table, the kind that appears when you realize the state prefers a private vocabulary. Inside were printouts, the master clock readout showing the pulse distribution, the radio teletype with the 9-minute gap, the camera buffers with chunked frames. At the bottom of the top sheet, in a single line of bureaucratic tenderness, was written, "Classified anomaly. Further analysis deferred." Classification is a way to make the world forget a friction. Men were reassigned quietly. The shore tech who first shrugged over the master clock found himself posted to a yard job 2 towns over. The tender's ice pilot, who had nothing to do with our mission, but who liked drama and had been lending us satellite feeds, got an invitation to join a top-secret test program. The petty officer, on whose watch the first stoppage occurred, received a counseling letter for lax record-keeping, and then a commendation 3 months later for good conduct. The missing man's family got the standard envelope and the standard language.
We were told to stop talking publicly. We were told to treat the event as a mechanical curiosity. We were also told, in a lower voice, in the way men tell a story in a room that locks at night, that sometimes ships pass through places in the water where the world hiccups. Time is not always a river, some men said. Sometimes it is a shallow pond that freezes and then thaws again. The language is soft and metaphoric, because the truth feels too large to fit in a memorandum. I left the service a year later. I gave the boat back and walked onto land that felt loud and wrong for days. But you cannot shed a ship's rhythm the instant you step ashore. I still wake at times and glance at clocks. I still take a second to see if the world is moving, and I still check that nothing has stolen a beat. There is one small thing I keep. It's a cheap wristwatch Corby gave me before I left, a protection joke between men who sign off watches for a life. He said, "If your clock ever stops, don't look away." He meant it as a piss take, but I keep it in my bedside drawer. Sometimes early, I wake in the half-dark, and my room seems to inhale. The clock by my bed ticks. For a second, I think I can feel the subtle stop that once stopped 9 minutes of a ship's life. I imagine a hand outside the hull, sliding along the steel, counting. Once I dreamed I heard a bell not attached to any tradition. Some orders are not for the log. They are for the way you close your eyes. I do not claim to know what happened. Technical analysis could not account for every datum we recorded. The pulse generator logged a steady beat. The cable bus showed an interruption only on distribution monitors. The radio logged silence. The cameras buffered. The bell rang in a frame that refused to be stitched. A man disappeared. Time reasserted itself as if nothing had happened. The final rule the captain gave was not stamped and stored. It is a small, quiet thing I carry because it still feels like the only defensible human response. If you are on a ship and the clocks stop, do not make a spectacle of your fear. Do your drafting. Secure your systems. Log the facts. Keep your mouth shut about the impressions that cannot be corroborated. And if, in the silent minutes, you feel the world shift, do not look out. Close your eyes. Sometimes the world asks for silence, and sometimes our silence is the only thing that keeps the machine running. I keep my eyes closed a little longer now when the morning light feels too honest. On those mornings, I hear, faintly and for a moment, the sound of a bell counting a beat somewhere I cannot reach, as if the sea remembered its own time and tried to teach me a new rhythm. I do not answer. Do not look at the clock at 02:09. If ever you see the second hand stop and then wait, do not let your eyes meet the pause. It is the simplest, loneliest rule I learned below decks.
Keep the machine, file the fact, and close your eyes when minutes go missing. Because 9 minutes is enough to change a man, and the sea keeps its own watch.